Good night, everyone. Thank you for joining us. The Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, the OECS, is celebrating 42 years. At the core of this celebration is a crystallization of vision, integration, sustainability, and progress. Tonight, it is my honor to be the host of this panel discussion, and my name is Vadisha John Brooks. We will explore tonight the OECS integration movement by taking a look at the history, achievements, and the future of the organization. If you're joining us via the ZIZ platforms, Facebook pages, SKNIS, or the OECS YouTube or Facebook pages, thank you for taking time out. With me is a distinguished panel and a very able group of persons who will be able to have a great discussion on where the Organization of the Eastern Caribbean States has come from, what they've done over the years, and what we expect to see going forward. To my far right is Dr. Didacus Jules, the Director General of the Organization of the Eastern Caribbean States. Dr. Jules is a visionary and brings with him a great love and passion for development, youth empowerment, and a great thrust for regional integration. To my immediate right is Mrs. Cara Daly Ferdinand, a youth parliamentarian who is excited about regional integration and who is excited about the voice of the youths as a part of this empowerment process. To my immediate left is Mrs. Frances Ann Satney, an OECS integrationist. Mrs. Satney has had the experience of living and working in several OECS countries. She's a seasoned banking expert and loves the thrust that the Organization of the Eastern Caribbean States has given to persons within the region. And to my far left is Commissioner Larry Vaughan, St. Kitts and Nevis Commissioner for the OECS. Please welcome them. The theme for tonight's discussion readily lends itself to compartmentalization, and as such, we will first explore the history of the Organization of the Eastern Caribbean States. As Caribbean people, there's a saying that, as cliche as it may be, we can all relate to: know your roots. So that process of becoming is necessary for us to understand where we are as an organization. And as such, we will look at where the Organization of the Eastern Caribbean States has come from, what led to this development. And so, Dr. Jules, my first question is directed to you. The Treaty of Bastille, which was signed on June 18, 1981, that actually established the Organization of the Eastern Caribbean States, what exactly was the common thread or the common history of the contracting states that led to this great need for a Treaty of Bastille and an organization of this nature?
Well, first of all, I think one has to trace the origin of the OECS to or link it to the demise of the West Indies Federation. It was the West Indies Federation, if you recall, was a project developed under the latter stages of British colonization, in which they tried to bring all of the countries of the West Indies together in one unit. That obviously made for easier administration and so on, and better serve the needs of the colonial empire. With the collapse of the West Indies Federation, the larger countries, remember Jamaica sought independence, followed by Trinidad and Tobago, and Eric Williams' famous statement, 1 from 10 leaves 0, meant that the smaller islands were left in a gray zone. And Sir Arthur Lewis, who we consider to be the intellectual author of regional integration, wrote a very seminal book called The Agony of the Little Eight, in which he spoke about the Windwards and Leeward Islands and what would be their future. And there are about 3 or 4 quotations from Sir Arthur that I think speak to the depth of his vision, and which also illustrates his position on the imperative for regional integration of the smaller islands. So in one case he said that regional integration can unleash economies of scale and scope, leading to increased efficiency, productivity, and competitiveness in the global market. So Sir Arthur always felt that it was only by coming together that we could create the mass that could help us survive a competitive global environment.
Thank you for that, Dr. Jules. Commissioner Vaughan, the Treaty of Bastille in 1981 was actually signed here in Bastille, St. Kitts. Is that of any significance to you in terms of the St. Kitts and Nevis narrative? Are you familiar with the realities of St. Kitts and Nevis at the time when this treaty was signed?
As a student of history, I have understood that it was 1979 in a meeting of the West Indies Associated States, which was WISA, the forerunner to the OECS, that the shaping of the OECS had begun. I was told that, as a student of history, that our late Premier Paul Southwell would have died attending one of these WISA meetings, seeking to establish what then became the OECS. And it was in 1981, then Premier, now Sir Kennedy Simmons, would have been among his equals as leaders of the Little Eight, I think minus Barbados, would have then come together to sign and to formalize the arrangement that is now the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. The integration process may have been slow. It wanted to offer that form of strengthening of the smaller states so that we can have a voice within the larger context of what is also CARICOM. And every other institution or organization or arena in which we would coexist with our much more developed brothers and sisters in the region. And so by 2010, our second Prime Minister, Dr. Douglas, would have sat with his contemporaries and would have realized that there is need for deeper strengthening of that integration process for the free movement of goods, of people, of services, wanting to go beyond just having the regional institutions of the central bank and the court and ECA and the other regional institutions, but to now formalize it so that someone by the name of Larry Vaughan or Vadisha or Mrs. Satney could really take it upon themselves and say, I am benefiting.
So Commissioner Vaughan, you're taking us from the initial Treaty of Bastille and segueing into that revised treaty,
yes,
where there was a need for, as it stated in its preamble, for a deeper level of regional integration. And so, Mrs. Satney, if I can then ask you, at the stage of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, when there of Bastille, I'm sorry, when there was this recognition for a greater level of integration, did that mean anything to you on a personal level?
Oh, yes. Good evening, all. It certainly did, and because it was at that revised Treaty of Bastille that we saw coming into being the free movement of of persons across the states, and therefore it brought, in fact, the deeper meaning of OECS and regional integration. So for me, particularly given my assignments throughout most of these islands, having been with a career banker, as you said, with the former RBC Royal Bank, it made such a difference having to move from not going through the hassle, if I could say, of having to have, your work permits and going through the application process. And it was such a breath of fresh air to be able to move from one country to the next. And more importantly, I'll always remember two key things that struck me coming out of this was having been in St. Kitts at the time when the bank was told and notified that you no longer need to go through that application process for the work permit. And secondly, coming back from one of the assignments and having gone through the airport and meeting the immigration officer and saying, welcome back home. I mean, that really felt good, and this is what the whole intent, I would say, of the founders back then. I'm pretty sure these are some of the things that they expected from the whole establishment.
So, Mrs. Satney, you are a personal beneficiary of the free movement that was crystallized under this revised Treaty of Bastille. I will now get some perspective from our youth parliamentarian. Mrs. Satney spoke about the free movement and what that meant for her under the banner of the revised Treaty of Bastille and the Organization of the Eastern Caribbean States. For you, from your perspective as a youth parliamentarian, the revised Treaty of Bastille and that consolidation of free movement, did that mean anything to you?
Yes, well, free movement of people, that means that I can choose any country within the OECS that, I can gain employment. So, for example, if there aren't, many opportunities for me to be employed in St. Kitts, I can decide, okay, I want to go, there's an opportunity in Dominica, I can use my driver's license, take a flight, go to Dominica, and begin working, essentially, with ease of access. For me, though, in order for regional integration to occur, you must be able to get to the destination. And I mean, for me, transportation to that island is an issue. Airfare costs are extremely exorbitant right now. For me, as a young person, I can get a flight to Miami for just over $800 US. I can similarly get a flight to St. Lucia for $800 US. Now, the distance between Miami and St. Kitts is just over 1,200 miles. The distance between St. Kitts and St. Lucia, I believe it is around, let's say, about 300 and something miles. Now, I would quicker go to somewhere further, at that same cost. It's a new environment. It has, great opportunities. I can go shopping. I have different opportunities. It's a new environment. Rather than go to some place that is very, very similar to my own. It's not that I would not want to go to, St. Lucia, but it is not quite practical for me to be spending almost 4 times as much in terms of the cost per mile. So to get there.
So thank you for that, Mrs. Daly Ferdinand. So in your opinion, though the framework is there, and in terms of the formalities for that free movement, you're saying in terms of the cost of intra-regional travel, that can be prohibitive.
Yes.
Dr. Jules, I will use this point to segue into, and I know we were looking at history, but of course, history and your achievements could be linked quite well. And so, as Mrs. Daly Ferdinand mentioned, intra-regional travel, I wanted to use that to segue into, first, some of the work of the OECS as it relates to, well, one, the Eastern Caribbean Civil Aviation Authority, and your work. I know recently in St. Kitts and Nevis, they went to Parliament, and some of the work of the OECS as it relates to the harmonization of the laws, we saw the product of that. Could you give us a bit more detail as it relates to, first, before we get into travel, the OECS impact on the aviation industry within the region?
Yeah, well, first of all, the OECS has a Civil Aviation Authority, ECA, Eastern Caribbean Civil Aviation Authority, and ECA's responsibility is to ensure an efficient coordination of civil aviation across the airspace. It has, one of the challenges that ECA faced in recent times was the downgrade of our airports. And that was a result of a combination of several factors. The condition of some of our airports, but more importantly in relation to the U.S. Civil Aviation Authority, it had to do with the legal requirements that ECA was managing on our behalf. The law governing civil aviation in the Eastern Caribbean was a bit cumbersome. It required that every Minister of Civil Aviation would have to agree to certain changes being made. And one of the requirements of the U.S. Civil Aviation was that there should be a simplification of that process so that the Director General of ECA would issue the regulations and thus be in a position in a very agile manner to change those regulations to facilitate changes in the industry. In addition to that, there was need for upgrading of some of the conditions of the airport, safety requirements, etc. So we have since embarked on a very concerted effort to correct those errors. In fact, what has happened is that draft legislation and new regulations have been developed, and several member states have signed. Of course, all member states need to complete that circle in order to ensure that we can then regain Category A status. But there are longer-term strategic issues that need to be addressed by ECA. One of them is that our overflight fees and so on are managed by the Trinidad and Tobago Civil Aviation Authority. And I think the time is ripe for ECA, once it regains that Category 1 status, to begin to look at what we need to do to exercise full sovereignty on our airspace. So that is going to be a challenge for the future, but once we do that, there are going to be huge opportunities for the OECS because it means a better management of our own airspace, further modernization of our airports, and most importantly, I believe that the Civil Aviation Authority can operate as a totally self-financing institution, actually providing revenue for the further upgrade of our airport infrastructure.
Just to piggyback on that before I go to the other panelists, are you saying then that if we were to achieve this position, then we can see an impact on the taxes in terms of for tickets and for travel, because then they would have more revenue earning opportunities?
Well, yes, but the two are not directly related. I mean, the taxation thing is a simple matter or relatively simple matter of governments making the decision that if we want to be competitive with our civil aviation, we cannot afford to charge very high landing fees or passenger fees to airlines transporting people across the region. And we've seen recently some governments have tried to reduce those costs. One of the things that we had done as an exercise in the OECS some time ago in order to convince, well before the whole this departure of LIAT and so on, was to do an actual animation showing the volume of flights across the region and to create a simulation that showed the governments what the impact of a reduction of passenger fees would mean on air travel, because that would significantly increase the volume of air travel, and therefore what governments may lose from direct passenger fee revenue, they would gain from other economic spin-offs of the increase in air traffic.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Vaughan, as it relates to the work of ECA, from the St. Kitts and Nevis perspective, would you say that the work of the OECS in the aviation industry, would you say that we can see some tangible effects of that within the St. Kitts and Nevis landscape?
We have recognized that ECCA has been able to provide us with the framework with which our aviation workers here in St. Kitts and Nevis in the Ministry of International Transport, they are able to focus on the improvements at the airport, security, to make sure that there is that comfort at the terminal, but also that there is safety of the passengers, the screening, and all that. The aviation agreement encompasses that, and we continue to upgrade as we go, because we find that not even just the regional flights, there are a lot of international flights coming now. We're adding JetBlue and others coming, and it means that our airport becomes busier. And we need to have that form of monitoring to ensure that at the end of the day, we do not lose because we've got more happening. So we invite ECCA to assist us in the oversight of these things, and we continue to benefit from it because that is now tied to our tourism product. And when more persons come and more persons can come, like the theme speaks to that vision, that integration, and the sustainability, I think they're assisting us with the sustainability aspect of it so that at the end of the day, there is progress.
Thank you for that. And you mentioned in terms of the sustainability aspect and tying it with our tourism product. I would like to zoom into the integration aspect and tie the comment by Mrs. Daly Ferdinand about what she perceives to be prohibitive intra-regional airfare. And so what impact do you say that has on the integration and the free movement, not just of people, but as it relates to goods, as it relates to accessibility within the OECS region?
Well, when the Economic Union was founded in 2010, we wanted to ensure as a region or sub-region that the level of integration was even deeper than was being allowed at the CARICOM level. We understood that we were considered as the LDCs, yet we understood that the deeper we made our integration, that we decided that, one, you don't need to have a skill certificate, that citizenship was enough for that free movement. And the vision that once a good lands in any one of the member states, there is a desire to have that free circulation of the good so that it doesn't attract taxation a second time coming across the border from one OECS member state to the next. All these tie into a deeper form of integration. And so what the process seems to have been, and the vision was, and the desire for progress is that we become one economic space, even though we are 7 different polities at this time. And so that integration says that way back from our histories, we all came on the same boat, just dropped off on different islands. And so the separations we give ourselves, calling ourselves St. Lucians, Kittitians, Nevisians, we have that common history and we seek a common destiny. And we can only do that together. And so when we look at what separates us still at this time, as young Daly Ferdinand is saying, and I like how she has put it over, that this is now a hindrance to where we can go if we are focusing. And in one of our tete-a-tetes this week, I shared with the Director General that my little beef is roaming charges when I travel, because if our businessmen and women are to interact and they do get their airfares lowered to travel to another island, they still have to fork it out to the telephone companies.
And Commissioner Vaughn, now
So
since you mentioned roaming, I think this is a good point for us to look at the OECS and their work as it relates to telecommunications. And so, Dr. Jules, I want to zoom in on the Eastern Caribbean Telecommunications Authority, ECTEL, and the work of the OECS, dating back to the time when most of our regions only knew one provider, and the work that was done through ECTEL to break the monopoly. Could you shed some light on the challenges and the journey and the work of ECTEL as it relates to the context of the OECD?
Okay, yeah, but I can do that. But before I do, I want to take a step backwards to take a broader look at the issue, because both Ms. Ferdinand and Commissioner Vaughn pointed to the issue of telecommunications. And I think there's a tendency when we talk about regional integration to first of all focus largely and solely sometimes on the economic integration part of it. And in fact, Sir Arthur Lewis, in the same agony of it that I referred to, made a very important point that regional integration should be pursued from a developmental perspective. So it's not just the economy, but it should prioritize the upliftment of marginalized regions and parts of the thing. Now, one of the challenges that Vaughn was referring to is what Freud describes as the narcissism of small differences. Everybody is trying to protect their own revenue, their own turf, and so on. And we really have to get past that. When we talk about the free movement entails three modalities for us in the OECS. One is movement by sea, movement by air, and the internet. The internet is an important highway in this time because the whole digital economy, a lot of more goods are moved digitally, more money and transactions are done digitally across the globe than are done by physical movement of people or goods. So that shows the importance of the ECTEL, the role of ECTEL. With respect to the performance of ECTEL, I think our greatest moment was when we achieved the breakup of the monopoly of cable and wireless. And in those days, the efforts made by the ministers of telecoms were very, very noteworthy. It was a serious battle between the major provider at the time, who tried to protect as much of that turf as possible. And thanks to their astuteness and their insistence on the need for liberalizing the market, we were able to get Digicel come in, and other providers came in at the same time. However, what was the breakup of monopoly? With the introduction of competition, fast forward another 5-10 years, has become a duopoly. So effectively, there is that coordination between the two main providers. And they have resolutely opposed the removal of roaming charges across the OECS, which was a very basic demand made by us at the Commission as well as by ECTEL. And their argument was that they needed time to allow that transition. Now, if anyone knows anything about the technology of telecoms, no time is needed to remove this. This is an administrative device. So the idea of one company having island companies, so there's say a Digicel or Flow, St. Kitts and Nevis, Flow St. Lucia, Digicel Antigua and Barbuda, having to do transactions across these companies is just a financial fiction. It is not a technological impediment. And I think we are at a stage where we have to now insist that the removal of charges, of roaming charges in particular, be done. The reduction of costs in telecommunications, especially the use of the internet. The internet has to become a public good and available. We saw the importance of the internet during COVID. And so internet as a public good is essential. It is essential to us not just for for communication purposes in a traditional way, but also for optimizing the opportunities in the digital economy.
Thank you, Dr. Jules. Dr. Jules, you mentioned a while ago that in terms of integration, at the core should be upliftment and development. And so, Mrs. Daly Ferdinand, in terms of the development of the youth arm and youth empowerment as it relates to regional integration, from your perspective, do you think that the youths are being involved on the widest level, or do you think there is scope for more impact as it relates to youth exposure and development?
There is always room for improvement, but I do feel that there is an impact made on the youth. Youth are involved, youth have a seat at the table to make their voice heard and to give their input on a number of matters. For me, education is very important, especially about OECS and how it operates, because I think a lot of times youth take for granted the benefits that this involvement, this regional integration has for us. Even me, I mean, sometimes you don't really think, okay, well, you know, I have this large area, all these states, all these countries that I can travel to and start to work. As a business person, I mean, I'm not limited to the 55,000 citizens in St. Kitts to offer my products and services. I have the whole OECS, which has 650,000 persons to market to. However, again, I mean, even if I am offering these services in these different countries, one, I have to get there. Two, in order to get there and be operational, I need telecommunications. And I mean, right now, those, you know, telecom companies, you know, you can't get a roaming plan for 3 days. You have to pay that fee for the entire month, you know, and it is a hindrance to business persons to want to expand, to go to, you know, offer their services and products and stuff in these other countries.
Thank you. So you're saying that a greater work on some of these hindrances will give a more practical realization of these efforts.
Yes.
Thank you for that. Mrs., I was just about to pass the ball to you as it relates to your work in the wider community, because I know you're involved generally in some charity work and you've seen, you know, the impact on youth. Could you comment on the overarching involvement of youth and their development as it relates to regional integration?
Just before I do that, if you'll allow me, I wanted to speak a little as well on the whole development aspect.
Certainly.
And just in terms of human resources, and again, coming back to the free movement and the ease of moving from one country to the next, whether it's for career advancement, whether it's as a result of your spouse may have moved, so you need to follow. Just something like your personal effects. You have been asked to take on an assignment in another country, and when do we get to the point of harmonization in terms of just customs, just duties? I need to move. Do I have to pay all of these duties when my effects come in? What are the incentives? How are we making it easier and more accessible to be able to move freely through all of these islands, but not at an extremely high cost? If a family decides to move, you've purchased a vehicle, or you're moving from one country to take on, for instance, here in St. Kitts, lots of persons coming, particularly say at the central bank. You have a vehicle. If you're bringing in the vehicle, you have just purchased the vehicle and brought it into one country that you're coming in from. Do I now have to pay some additional duties to get it into St. Kitts? So these are some of the things as well which we need to look at, and how do we ensure that the opportunities that are out there for our human resource capacity, so that we don't have a brain drain, that persons don't decide then to migrate outside of the OECS and go to the UK or to the US, but that there are incentives that will make them think twice and say, you know, I could really go to one of the other islands. In terms of the youth, definitely there's a voice at the table, I agree, and youth today, so the areas and the intentions of the founders back then, the question is how much have we done, how well have we done to ensure that they were implemented, and what can we do to improve them. There are so many areas for youth. We have the sports, we have culture, we have just the whole question of digital, of science, of competitions. There are lots of opportunities again, and perhaps the OECS authority can consider how do we ensure that we keep using all of these skills, all of these opportunities to continue keeping the region together. There were things like OECS netball, there were shows, cultural shows, for instance. There was the OECS Queen Show in Dominica.
And you're saying that these elements, you're not seeing them anymore?
Yes, and can we use them now to keep the youth together, to keep them connected, and by doing that, we are ensuring that we are keeping the OECS integration as well.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Vaughan, as it relates to the first point that Mrs. Satney raised in terms of personal effects and that harmonization in terms of taxes, do you see us getting to that point anytime soon? Is anything in the works from a St. Kitts and Nevis perspective?
Well, the St. Kitts and Nevis perspective is commixed and commingled, as one pastor I've heard would say, into the whole of what is the OECS Economic Union. St. Kitts and Nevis continues to be a partner with our colleagues. And we understand that in just moving the goods from one state to the next would have attracted, under normal circumstances, this revenue for the government. And the question is, when you forego, how do you ensure that the full relationship that continues to exist would redound to such economic, social, and other benefits that you would recoup cost, because the person who moves with his or her effects now become a productive agent in your country, is able to bring new insights, bring new skills to the table, and so it adds to your gross domestic product. There is a trade-off, and St. Kitts and Nevis continues to understand that. And so when we sit at the table, we present our information and we say, we are prepared to see this happen because we can be and we will be a beneficiary of it. The situation often comes that we have a situation where I recall being in Antigua in 2016, it was, where the OECS met to discuss the free circulation of goods at St. James's Club. And we are still seeking to finalize some of the issues that were raised at St. James's Club back in May of 2016. For example, whether we will go to a customs union, because when we go to a customs union, it means we are going to harmonize our tariffs, and that at whatever rate the goods land in one island, they would land at the same rate in all islands. Or we will want to keep the rates as they are, and we now go about a revenue sharing arrangement. And if we go to a revenue sharing arrangement, what will be the markers and the steps by which we achieve that balance where no one is worse off on account? And so that discussion continues, and St. Kitts and Nevis continues to be prepared to reach to a point of resolution. Because when it comes to this aspect, I feel like how the children of Israel felt going in the wilderness for 40 years. And some of us may die and not be able to see the promised land in this aspect of it. But we are still hopeful, because as one Singaporean deputy prime minister put it in a book, he said, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And so we want to be at the table to make sure that there are benefits for the citizens of St. Kitts and Nevis within the context of this regional integration.
And so, as it relates to your attitude of hope, I'm going to turn to Dr. Jules. Dr. Jules, as the umbrella organization, I first want you to comment on the issue of the harmonization of tariffs and the options presented by Commissioner Vaughan in terms of what was generated from the discussion. Currently, does the organization have a particular route in mind that they would like to guide the states towards in terms of harmonization of rates and duties and tariffs?
Yeah, well, put very simply and succinctly, yes, the main item of discussion has always focused on some sort of revenue sharing formula. But I think one has to look very carefully at this issue, because there are some problems of regional integration that to the person in the street appear very simple and logical. Why do I have to pay for duty for a car coming into St. Kitts and Nevis, and then I move into St. Lucia with it, and then I have to pay duties again? That sounds totally illogical, right? However, the problem there is not the logic of the solution. The problem is the complications of the infrastructural changes that have to be made. Because you're talking about dismantling a whole complex of regulations and tariffs and so on, upon which the governments largely depend for their revenue. So it's easy to think of a glib solution, and I'm not making excuses about it, because I recognize there is a fierce urgency of now in getting a lot of these things done. But you require a very resolute political will, and we're going to have to really think carefully through the question of equity. How do we manage this so that no state is left behind, no state is disadvantaged? And there's also a downside to it, because if we simplify that whole architecture of taxation and so on, it is going to mean that for this to be run effectively, you need also a harmonization of the infrastructure guiding that. Computerization and digitization of those processes, it would invariably mean a significant reduction in the size of government bureaucracies. Now, I can say, and it's a book I highly recommend to everyone to read, Why Nations Fail, because in all of this effort to regional integration, the elephant in the room that we are not touching is the public service and the standards and quality of the public service and the efficiency in delivering services to the general public. Until we also tackle that and do it in a way that creates greater efficiencies, a greater sense of urgency, we are not going to succeed in these efforts.
Thank you, Dr. Jules. And Dr. Jules, just to go back to the topic of youth involvement, I know I got the perspective from some of the other members of the panel, but from the Organization of the Eastern Caribbean States, I know there's been much effort as it relates to even the U report. You've been asking the youths to say yes and to come on in a deep and beneficial way. Could you shed some light on the efforts as it relates to youth engagement on the organization level?
Okay, first of all, we've made a lot of progress on the youth front as a region, both individually and collectively. However, when we analyze it at the Commission, one of the fundamental flaws of our progress to date is that our work with youth has always been predicated on youth as the objects of development and not as the subjects of their own development, put very simply. So it's always about youth policies have always been written by experts, older persons writing youth policies that have to be implemented to benefit young people. The extent of the engagement of young people has been limited to just discussions with consultants and so on. The perspective we have brought to this table is that young people need to be the architects of their own future. And the only way you can take responsibility is by beginning to assume responsibility for developing that policy. Our approach to youth development started with looking at 20 years of reports on the condition of youth in the region, and out of that extracting what we consider to be 7 fundamental pillars that, if addressed, would basically alter the condition of youth in the OECS. And we engage young people in that process. We were doing that for the last 3-4 years with a youth advisory network that we established with representatives from all of the member states. And we were able to turn it over to the youth and say, these are the 7 pillars that we've identified from the analysis of the reports, but you redefine that in a way that makes sense to young people. And so the whole naming of our process and the refinement of the pillars was done by the Youth Advisory Network. And these pillars very quickly, they came up with the acronym of YES, for Youth Empowered Society and Youth Engaged Strategy. So it has a double meaning. And the pillars are, yes, I earn for employment and entrepreneurship. Yes, I learn for education and training. Yes, I belong for citizenship and identity. Yes, I express for culture and creativity. Yes, I inherit for environment and sustainable development. Yes, I matter for child and youth protection. And yes, I move for healthy lifestyle and sport. So if you think of it, and these pillars working together, there are initiatives that can be undertaken that could be an entrepreneurial initiative, but it's also a sports initiative, or it could also have an educational dimension. So the work being done by that committee now is coming to a close, and they will be proposing to governments a range of initiatives that they would like to see happen. You mentioned U-Report. U-Report is a very important tool. There are about 5,500 young people across the OECS on U-Report on their cell phones, which is an easy tool for doing polls, and we can disaggregate the results of those polls by gender, by age, by geographic location, and so on. But that is going to be a very powerful tool now to help us to zoom in to give our governments a report as to what young people in each territory want to see happen, and what the youth across the region see as being the big picture initiatives that need to be put in place from their perspective.
Thank you, Dr. Jules. So at the core of youth development, we have youths being the authors
of their own development
and contributing to this mechanism.
Exactly.
Thank you to our viewers. You're currently looking at the panel discussion under the theme OECS, celebrating our history, our achievements, and our future. At this time, we will take a commercial break. Please stay tuned.
Frankie, you know I'm traveling to Antigua this afternoon and I forgot my passport at home? Boy, it's a good thing I have my driver's license. I'll still be able to travel.
Oh, how can you travel to Antigua without your passport?
Under the OECS Freedom of Movement regime, OECS citizens can travel to any of the 7 protocol member states without a passport, once they have an official and valid identification card with their picture and nationality on it.
Really? Since when?
Since the establishment of the Eastern Caribbean OECS Economic Union under the revised Treaty of Basse, it entered into force in 2011.
So, you mean to tell me that I can leave St. Lucia and go to another OECS country with just my driver's license or national ID, and customs and immigration won't stop me?
Yes, you can even use your voter's registration card or social security card. As a matter of fact, as a citizen of an OECS protocol member state, you are entitled to indefinite stay when you travel to another OECS protocol member state, so you can live and work without a work permit or skilled national certificate.
As a construction worker here, I could take my trade to Grenada or any other OECS country?
Yes, Frankie, you're straight.
And what about my wife and children's schooling?
Frankie, OECS citizens and their children will be granted equal rights and privileges under the freedom of movement. That includes access to social services, labor market schemes, health and education for your children and your wife.
This free movement thing sounds nice. Hassle-free travel to any OECS country, live and work for as long as you like. The OECS Economic Union is the real deal. For more information, visit www.oecs.org. On June 18, 1981, representatives of the governments of Antigua and Barbuda, the Commonwealth of Dominica, Grenada, Montserrat, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines signed the Treaty of Bastille, establishing a new organization for cooperation among their countries, the Organization of the Eastern Caribbean States, OECS. It replaced the West Indies Associated States Council of Ministers, which was devised by the UK government in 1967, under which the countries worked together in civil aviation, tourism, the judiciary, monetary matters, and relations with CARICOM. The OECS has widened to include 3 associated members, including Anguilla, the British Virgin Islands, and as recently as February 2015, the French region of Martinique, creating a regional body of 10 member states. The OECS member states continue to benefit through cooperation in education, the environment, healthcare, and tourism, among other development areas. Through the revised Treaty of Bastille in 2010, the 7 founding member states have also formed an economic union aimed at promoting faster growth and development among themselves. The governing body of the OECS is the OECS Authority, consisting of the head of government of each member state. It is supported by other organs of the OECS, including the Council of Ministers, an Economic Affairs Council, the OECS Assembly, and the OECS Commission. The OECS Commission is the secretariat of the OECS and is headed by a Director General. OECS Integration, uniting for a brighter future for all our citizens.
Thank you and welcome back. We're having a panel discussion and we're discussing the OECS integration movement. We're looking at our history, our achievements, our future under the OECS banner. The OECS is celebrating 42 years this year, and we believe it is necessary for the persons who are benefiting on a day-to-day basis from the initiatives of the OECS to understand and get a deeper level of appreciation of the work of the organization. Thank you for taking time out and for being a part of this initiative. Commissioner Vaughan, as we look at celebrations and the organization, right in St. Kitts is the headquarters of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. Now, the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank brings to the OECS region a common dollar, common currency. This is a product of the OECS. What do you think of the what are your views as it relates to the value and the stability that this institution under the OECS banner brings to member states?
Thank you very much for that question. The OECS, especially coming in 2010, and the Economic Union, seeks to want always to ensure that there is prosperity, that there is a control of inflation on the spending power of the people. And the central bank over the last 40 years, because they are celebrating their 40th anniversary this year, just like St. Kitts and Nevis is celebrating 40 years of independence, the central bank for 4 decades has been the bastion of keeping our dollar fixed. That we are not having that crest wave and that rise in the devaluation or the movement of the dollar. And so that stability that we have had, on account that if we had had our own currency, a St. Kitts Nevis dollar perhaps, or an Antigua dollar, or a St. Lucian dollar, or whatever name we would have called it. St. Lucia might have called it their piton. We don't know. But whatever it is, a beko? A bear. We would have had that situation where there was a risk. The risk would have been greater for instability, for greater inflation, and so the central bank would has over the last 40 years assisted us as a region to keep prices affordable. Even though they have skyrocketed, we think, they would have been astronomically more in the different states had we not had the central bank to do so. And so over the years, the bank has been able to help to bring the monetary policies that we need in place in the banking sector to make sure that our banks across the region aren't too liquid, because we get prosperity can be a bad thing sometimes, where you have all this money just sitting in your banks and you don't have the policies to really make it work for you. And so the central bank continues to do a very good job, and we thank them. We wish them 40 more years of success, and so that we can grow our way to greater prosperity.
Thank you, Commissioner Vaughn. Mrs. Satney, if I can get your perspective as it relates to the value of this common currency from a banking perspective, and someone going through the region freely, working and being able to use this dollar within the OECS region and not having to have any fear as it relates to devaluation. Could you comment on that?
Yes, thank you. Of course, and in addition to not having any fear, it's about accessibility. And what we have seen growing throughout the years with the central bank, even recently with the introduction and launching of Dcash. So central bank as an institution, they've not only provided for us the stability of the EC dollar, but by advancing into the whole digital theme that we're in now, providing that access to the cash through Dcash, and having been able to move, for me, working in most of the islands, one of the advantages as well was being able to, I will mention again, through my employer's Royal Bank, where even just through the access through your ATMs, where there was the network that regardless of which of the islands that I went to, that I was able to access that cash immediately through that ATM system. And of course, all of that was hinged through the central bank in terms of providing the regulations and the guidance for this to happen. So very critical and important institution. I would also just add quickly too, as the central bank been celebrating 40 years, the institution which attracted most of our OECS nationals. And I'm sure if we take do an assessment now in terms of how many of the nationalities are employed at the central bank. So that was important too. And again, going back to the intention of the founders and how easy they made it in terms of the incentives to make it attractive for persons wanting to leave their homeland and come into St. Kitts to work at the central bank, to be able to foster and to be able to bring forward and to facilitate all of the intentions of having a common institution. So very important
Thank you.
work that the central bank is doing.
Thank you. Dr. Jules, what would you say to persons who are of the view that the OECS and organizations of this nature, they're simply talk shops? They go, they have meetings, you know, they have a good time, they put forward these policies that we can't understand, they make these decisions that don't affect us. What do you say to that? Are there any initiatives or any elements of decisions coming from the OECS that positively affect the everyday man on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. Well, I've often said that I think we will be succeeding as the OECS if on any street corner, arbitrary street corner in any member state, you poll 10 citizens and you ask them questions about the OECS, and they can say, yes, I know about the OECS, and they can mention some of the benefits that the OECS has brought to them personally. Because there are a lot of invisible benefits that flow from the integration movement, and they cover a range of areas. An additional point that many people don't realize, the strength of the EC dollar and all of that is well recognized. But the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union is only one of 4 currency unions in the world. And in fact, the ECCB model has been studied by other countries to see what lessons there are for them in creating that sort of unified construct. At the OECS, we've had, for example, let me just run through some of the ways in which the OECS is able to make a difference in the lives of ordinary people across the region. We have the pharmaceutical procurement service. If that service did not exist, the average cost of some of the most critical medicines would be at least 40% higher. Because this pharmaceutical procurement service has been in place for the last 36 years. And it provides and guarantees a reliable, cheaper source. Because it is pool procurement, we're able to bring in medicines cheaper. Now, the rub about it is not just the cheapness, the cheaper cost of the medicines, but also to guarantee the quality. I'm sure if people, follow a lot of what's happening on the news. Recently, there was a raid in some part of Mexico where they discovered fake factories producing fake medicines. And you could not tell the difference between looking at the labeling of those medicines between real medication and the fake medication. One of the critical roles played by the PPS is quality control, and we actually monitor, test, and do quality assurance on the drugs being imported into the OECS. And there are prescribed banned list of suppliers who, once they produce things that are sub-quality, they are cut out of the procurement chain. In the last, on average, we save about $5 million for the countries. And certainly in the last, 36 years or more, we've done about $1 billion EC dollars in business in bringing in medicines, not just for the public service, but also for private pharmacies and so on.
So you're saying that what might be taken for granted when persons go to the pharmacies, whether public or private, and they see the medication and the prices are affordable, that they do not realize, or they might not realize, that the OECS stands there as a filter ensuring that this is accessible. There's
quality, and there's at the cheapest possible price. Now, during COVID, again, the efficacy of that was proven because the OECS was able to bring in the first batch of medicines from India. We actually chartered a flight to bring in the first doses of the COVID-19 vaccine that came in, that was supplied to Barbados and the OECS. So there are a lot of ways in which this works. In other arenas, like in education, for example, a lot of work has been done. Like we've had different projects funded by different partners, like USAID, for example. There was an early learners reading program that benefited 73,000 kindergarten children, from kindergarten to grade 2 students. We distributed over 300,000 teaching and learning reading resources across 2,582 classrooms in the OECS.
So, Dr. Jules, permit me to ask, as it relates to that exercise in terms of the education, what, as it relates to the mandate of the organization, why exactly did you set about on this endeavor to have this educational program? What part do you think that education and proper and sustainable education has to play within the context of regional integration?
Well, remember I quoted Sir Arthur earlier about integration not just being an economic thing. It has to be a life thing. It's about changing the quality of life and the options available to citizens in the member states. So that, in that context, one is talking about the economy, one is talking about education, health. You know, you cannot have a viable economy with citizens who are very ill or constantly ill. You cannot build a modern economy with citizens who are illiterate or uneducated. So all of these dimensions are related to each other, and that's why the OECS mandate is a very broad mandate. If you look at the revised Treaty of Bastille, you'll see that it spans a whole, I think there are about 40 areas that are mentioned in the revised treaty for harmonization and joint endeavor. So that example I gave there, just in one area, the early learners reading program, these were the results. Now, actually, that project funded by USAID exceeded the expectations and even arrived at a point of completion with savings from the monies originally allocated. And USAID agreed that we should use that money, continue to use the remaining funds rather than return it in a creative way. So we moved from developing the reading capability of those students to challenge those students to become writers. And so from becoming better readers, they were challenged to start writing their own stories. And right now there are about a dozen books on a global free platform where student reading material is available. A dozen books written by students from the OECS with illustrations by them that are published by them as published authors. And we are now building that into the system, from being strong readers to also becoming writers in their own right.
Thank you. But Dr. Jules, before we go into another area where we see the day-to-day benefits of the organization, Commissioner Vaughan, Dr. Jules spoke about these initiatives in terms of education. As it relates to a sustainable and an evolving education system, do you think that there's more work to be done? And do you think that as it relates to the thrust of regional integration, enough is being done at the more fundamental level in terms of primary school, etc., in terms of educating these students on the OECS and organizations of this nature?
Oh, wonderful question. I'll say that because only today and for this week, we've been in the classroom speaking to our young people here in St. Kitts and on Nevis about OECS. We wanted to know, how much do the children know about the OECS? Do they understand the benefits that the OECS brings to their families, their communities, their country? And I am happy to report that of the 9 schools we've been to so far this week, that the children know much about the OECS. They appreciate and understand the history, especially the signing of the treaty here in Bastille. And they understand that there is that freedom of movement, and that there are also other islands that are not full members of the OECS, that there are some associate states, and that they are on path towards becoming full members, and how the whole expansion of the OECS can go beyond the 7 charter states that we now know, and can go to others like Anguilla eventually, the British Virgin Islands, Guadeloupe, Martinique, and perhaps St. Martin, who is now seeking to become an associated state of the OECS. So the children do have that understanding. The challenge for us is now to take that knowledge and have it translate towards greater application for them, so that when they become high schoolers, can we have an exchange between the high schools of St. Kitts and Nevis and Antigua and Barbuda and Grenada and the other islands, so that the integration process is not just the economics, but is the socialization. It is the understanding of the culture of the other islands that call ourselves the OECS. And so there is a work to be done, and that's why I like the theme, that it speaks to vision and sustainability and progress, because the integration process is not a static goal. Every time we get to where we want to go, there is always further to go. And so, and once we have young people, the horizon is never just the goal. There is always something beyond, because young people are promising, and they will always bring us more to think about and to do. And so the OECS, especially from the position of the Commission and the St. Kitts and Nevis, we want to always make sure that our young people have a passion for regional integration, because it is the space in which they will grow, they will develop, and they too will lead in the future.
Thank you, Commissioner Vaughan. Mrs. Daly Ferdinand, in terms of initiatives within the educational landscape, is there anything that you would like to see done so as to promote regional integration a bit more amongst the youth?
Well, I think a lot is already being done in terms of the, the EU report and getting youths' voices heard, and that data-driven aspect of it. It is important to, as Commissioner Vaughan mentioned about, going into the primary schools and starting at that level, because those young persons in the primary schools are the future leaders of tomorrow. And in order for OECS to continue to grow and to develop and to mature and to adapt, we need to start from that aspect. 42 years is not a small feat. 42 years is way older than I am. So, it's a very long time in my opinion.
Thank you.
But we have seen the OECS mature and develop over the years. Even in terms of the inclusion of Martinique and Guadeloupe, that's including non-English speaking territories. And I hope that, in future we can, further, develop and mature and strengthen the OECS, integration process, and to further the regional integration.
So you're looking forward to even more expansion,
yes, more
this
expansion,
wonderful
more deepening
umbrella
of the economic union, and expansion to broaden the countries.
Thank you. So Dr. Jules, a while ago we looked at the OECS and its impact on the health industry, in the education landscape. Are there any other areas that you would say throughout the years the OECS has really impacted the day-to-day and everyday living of the regular persons?
I would say since Hurricane Maria, especially marked a watershed moment for us in terms of environment and climate change issues. So we've been very active in that space, and there have been very tangible benefits given to member states through the work that we've done in that space. In fact, we've done things like, and some of the work we've done is invisible but really important, like the upgrading of OECS building codes and building guidelines to support resilient buildings against different climatic hazards. Now that may seem like a paperwork thing, but in reality it translates into how we construct homes and hospitals and public buildings. We've also been involved in a range of initiatives in different communities across the OECS in all member states that have to do with resilience and climate adaptation changes, interventions in flood mitigation, slope stabilization, coastal protection, landslide mitigation, water security, smart agriculture, and I have some of the communities here like Sanderson Estate in Antigua and Barbuda, Beckway in St. Vincent, Londonderry in Dominica, Granite Tang in Forest Nursery in Grenada, Petit Martinique, Sortes, Sanchez in Grenada, Mero in Dominica, Corinth in St. Lucia. So we're pretty active in those spaces. Now let me make the point though that in pointing out those things, the way in which we operate at the Commission, this is not the OECS Commission coming in like some benefactor into member states. All of this work is done in very close collaboration with member states. Some of these are priorities identified by member states. Our role is to engage with the officials, and in many cases we are able to achieve those things because we are able to leverage the skills, the comparative skills and competencies across member states. So we may bring somebody who is, say, well versed in smart agriculture from Grenada to go to a place like BVI to assist them in their smart agriculture initiatives. So that cross-fertilization is important in helping us to achieve those things. Supply and installation of capacity building tools. So for example, hydromet equipment and meteorological instruments and equipment, things like automatic weather stations at airports and at strategic sites across 9 member states. We have monitoring stations for flash floods that give early warning to save lives in communities.
So the OECS has really been working, and it would be safe to say that you've spread out your work and your focus amongst quite a lot of different areas and industries, so as to ensure that regional integration is, as you said, on a more developmental stage.
Yeah, and when you say the OECS has been working, let me emphasize, it's not just the OECS Commission, it is the OECS member states. Everyone has been working very hard. Not all of that work is visible to the public, but its impact and the protections that it provides is there for the public.
So integration on all levels, not just as it relates to the member states, but integration as it relates to the Commission, and the governments, the decision-making bodies and of the region.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let me just give you a quick example of how this translates. So we have the authority, who are the heads of government, and again, the people don't realize, they talk often about the differences that politicians have, but they don't recognize the strong synergy that exists with our heads of government, so that the heads as the authority make the ultimate decisions on policy and direction. But we also have, and by the way, to assist with the agility of decision making, we have actually make a lot of use of WhatsApp. So I have a WhatsApp group with all of the heads of government, myself and the governor of the central bank on this, and we can get a decision made within 24 hours. By putting this up here.
That is what we like to hear, Dr. Jules. So the OECS, as it's growing, as it's making use of technology, it's about efficiency, practicality, and making decisions to benefit. Now, as we are about to wrap up this very dynamic discussion, Mrs. Satney, I will ask you, in this post-COVID-19 era, what do you see as the future of the OECS? In closing, where do you see the OECS going and taking the member states within this phase?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And some of the things that I would like to see, and I liked the response from Commissioner Vaughan in terms of the children and the information that they already have about the OECS, and perhaps is doing a better job at all of the OECS nationals understanding all of the work that the OECS Commission has been doing, perhaps we're as OECS nationals, whether we are in, say, those of us here in St. Kitts or those in St. Vincent or whoever in Dominica or outside of the OECS region, a greater synergy so that when we speak, we talk about not me as a Dominican residing in St. Kitts, but we talk about us as OECS nationals. And what is the impact that we are making? How do we ensure that our voice is heard when we go to the wider meetings, whether it's through CARICOM, whether it's WHO, whether it's WTO, wherever we are asked to present and wherever we are asked to have a voice, that the OECS nationality comes out.
Thank you, Mrs. Satney. So you want to see us being branded more as OECS nationals as opposed to the subsets. Yeah. Mrs. Daly Ferdinand, what does the future of the OECS look like to you?
Well, as Mrs. Satney mentioned about identification as an OECS member, perhaps we should go to the point of having perhaps a OECS identification card. So, I mean, instead of, I'm a resident of St. Kitts and Nevis, it just gives the physical, confirmation that, okay, I am an OECS member. I am part of this great institution,
Thank you. So you're saying not just we know we now have the ability to travel within the OECS regions using ID cards, but you would like to have us even have that common card. Commissioner Vaughan, in closing, as the Commissioner of St. Kitts and Nevis to the OECS, what are your plans or your goals in terms of the vision that you have for the OECS in closing?
Well, I am glad to hear the suggestion of the OECS identification card. Upon becoming commissioner, I discovered some things that I don't think I would have known as an ordinary citizen. And the first is that the OECS has a song. There is an OECS song, and over the last 3 days, I have been singing the song with the children. We played it in the schools, Rise Up, Stay Up OECS, speaking to that commonness, that common nature that brings us together as a people. And so I believe that where we need to go, and what I can see happening, is that much more information and greater communication is to be had with the citizenry.
Thank you. So Commissioner Vaughan,
if I am to draw from, my regional counterpart, in the CARICOM experience, we have a CARICOM ambassadors chat, and very much the same as Director General Jules spoke of the heads having a chat. Director General also has a chat for the commissioners. And coming out of the CARICOM chat, though, the Barbadian ambassador to CARICOM does a weekly show, and he outlines to the people of Barbados what Barbados has been doing in CARICOM during that week. And I've already drawn from it a work program that I believe I would need to do here in St. Kitts and Nevis, not only for CARICOM and the ACS, but also for the OECS. Because people can only act on the information they receive.
So to Commissioner Vaughan, we should look out for more initiatives from you as it relates to communication and information
the Regional
sharing.
Integration and Diaspora Unit.
Wonderful.
Which I have the fortune of heading at this time.
We look forward to that.
So we can have that discussion. What is it the people of St. Kitts and Nevis desire from these regional organizations? What have they been receiving? What are their criticisms? How can we make it better?
Thank you. And Dr. Jules, just to end this dynamic, and I must say I learned a lot tonight, discussion, please tell us, very briefly, what can we look forward to in this post-COVID-19 era where sustainability, a thrust for green energy, these areas are being highlighted? What can we look forward to if you were to say it in 2 sentences from the OECS?
You give me an impossible task to do. Well, essentially, there are 6 strategic priorities that we've identified for this period, this triennium, and that has to do with really, at the core, the number 1 priority is accelerating regional integration. And all of the other priorities fit in alignment to that. Commissioner Vaughan mentioned communications. We've developed a communications policy within the OECS Commission, and we're about to roll out a strategy. And of course, it will be coming to commissioners for review. But the interesting thing about it is that we are actually targeting and segmenting the population and the demographics so that the messages that are relevant to the respective audiences are able to get to them. Dealing with young people, it was amazing in today's, one of the schools today, I just asked the young people, by show of hands, how many of you have cell phones or mobile devices? And almost every hand went up. So it says something about what the modality of communication that we need to engage.
Wonderful.
But just to wrap up quickly, there are a lot of areas where we need to, on every front, in education, in energy, in health, in youth, we'll be accelerating our work. But as I said earlier, that work is not being done by the Commission solely. It is being actively engaged with active engagement of persons and expertise within the member states.
Thank you. So greater collaboration, greater acceleration so that we can achieve the common goal. Thank you everyone for joining us. The Organization of the Eastern Caribbean States, the OECS, is celebrating 42 years under the theme Vision, Integration, Sustainability, Progress. I am Vadisha John Brooks and I have been your host tonight. With me, we had Dr. Didacus Jules, the Director General of the OECS, Mrs. Daly Ferdinand, Youth Parliamentarian, Mrs. Satney, and Commissioner Larry Vaughan, the St. Kitts Nevis Commissioner to the OECS. We trust that this was an informative session, and please keep your eyes out for the initiatives and the work of the Organization of the Eastern Caribbean States. We have
to get updates.
Be sure to log into the Organization of the Eastern Caribbean States website to get updates. They have a very dynamic and advanced communications unit, and they're putting out the work. It is your business to learn about our business. Let's do this together. Thank you.